Hello, welcome to another book drop in our series here at the Centre for Deliberative Democracy and Global Governance at the University of Canberra. And welcome, Henk. So this is Hendrik Wagenaar. Thanks very much for joining us.
It's my pleasure.
Hendrik Wagenaar is at the International School for Government at King's College London. He's an academic advisor there, but also happily he's an adjunct professor right here at the University of Canberra. So Henk, we're talking about your book.
Yes, this is the book Meaning in Action, Interpretation and Dialogue in Policy Analysis. And it was published in 2011 and the feedback I get since then is that people really enjoy reading the book, are happy with it. Fulfills a function for them, and
fantastic.
Let's talk about it.
I know it's a very much admired and much read book, certainly around here. But it'd be interesting to hear from you. You know how the readers have responded to it over time. But can you first talk to us about what inspired you to write this book?
That's still very clear in my mind. I was at the time doing a lot of teaching with Maarten Heyer, with whom I edited Deliberative Policy Analysis. So it was sort of in the wake of the publication of that book. And it were seminars for master students and PhD students on interpretive policy analysis. And the reaction was invariably, this is so difficult, or I have no idea how to do this. I'm interested, but I have no idea how to do this. Or, which was another common reaction, people came in with a fixation on a particular method, most of the time discourse analysis, and without giving any thought to considerations of what is the research question. Is this a useful method for this particular question?
Right.
So I thought, I'm going to clear the mist. I'm going to write a book about it.
Fantastic.
And that's what I started doing. I had a couple of other sort of personal missions here. One of them is that I wanted the book also to be a bit of a philosophical education. To this very day, I'm always astonished and, let's say, somewhat irritated by the kind of arrogance of reviewers of papers that we submitted a lot of papers in my day on with interpretive methods. But so you get these kind of positivist reviewers who reject these papers without any knowledge of what interpretation and interpretive methods are, but more also by being totally ignorant of basic philosophical insights, and in particular insights such as non-foundationalism, which sounds very technical, but is simply the understanding that there is no such thing as a firm foundation of our knowledge, for example, in facts or observations. And the other thing is the fact-value dichotomy, that somehow facts need to be kept separate from value, while in reality they are completely merged with each other. These are not contested esoteric insights. This is sort of basic philosophical knowledge for about a century already. And why do we need to know, basics of microeconomics, for example, and we don't have to know these kinds of insights, which I think are very, very, very important. So there's a little bit about that, and I say that also in the book. I don't want to turn the reader into a philosopher, but I like to provide a bit of the basic knowledge that makes it understandable interpretation. I also wanted to, that's my other goal, establish interpretive social science not as a lesser social science, but as a different mode of explanation. So I think there are two big modes of explanation. Causal explanation, which some of us engage in, and interpretive explanation in terms of meaning. And the two are cannot be reduced to one another. They're really different ways of understanding the world. So I try to explain that in the book. And then I try to take away a number of misunderstandings which pop up over and over and over again. And one is that meaning is subjective somehow, right? Meaning is something that is tied to a particular person, and it's when you have a different meaning. So and therefore it can never be scientific, which is simply untrue. There is such a thing as objective meaning, which I discuss in the book also. Think, for example, of let's take an institution as marriage. All four of us in the room here, we know what marriage is. We don't have now. Marriage might have a very personal meaning for you. My marriage is different for me than your marriage is for you, right? But the institution of marriage is an objective meaning in the sense that we all know what it is, and there's lots of other of these things. The other thing is that meaning is somehow in the mind. They're very closely connected. That's subjective. It's only in the mind, and therefore again, it's not real science. Meaning is not in the mind. Meaning is we decide upon what something means by observing concrete behavior, and therefore I make it very clear in the book, and I cite the great anthropologist and interpretivist Clifford Geertz, that you can only do interpretive social science if you're a very, very good empiricist. You need to do very fine-grained empirical research in a particular field to make sure that you understand what you're doing here. So those are a couple of things I wanted to get across in the book.
Great. And you certainly do. And you talk about how, this interpretive approach to policy analysis is different and it's important. And importantly, it's also worth noting that's difficult to do. Yeah. So can you expand on how it helps people to do it better?
Well, there's a couple of answers to that. First of all, I try to clarify what meaning is, right? What does it mean to say that people who are on welfare are seen as lesser citizens, for example? That's already a meaning, right? And then there's a chapter in the book which I'm very proud, is a method chapter without methods. So I'll talk about it. So very quickly about meaning. What I do is that was one of the reasons for the confusion of the students. Meaning is not of one kind. And I distinguish between three different kinds of meaning. Well, they're related, but they're different in their philosophical assumptions, but also in the methods that we use to capture that kind of meaning. And it's hermeneutic meaning, discursive meaning, and dialogical meaning. And very briefly, hermeneutic meaning is sort of the classical sense. You try to understand something by situating it in its proper context. And so you understand the small thing by understanding the larger context. You understand the larger context by understanding the small thing. And you go back and forth between those. There's also discursive meaning, where the meaning is in the larger linguistic, practical structures, which are almost invisible, that make something stand out as something we recognize. So the case in the book is psychiatry. We recognize psychiatric syndromes and psychiatry as a profession because over the years, over the centuries, a whole ensemble of institutions, practices, knowledge, objects, you name it, has emerged that we recognize now as the profession of psychiatry and psychiatric illness. And in other societies, other cultures, these things are recognized differently. And then there's dialogical meaning, which says that meaning emerges in our interaction with others and with our material environment. So there's a lot more to say, but I don't have the time. So how do we do research? Well, what I emphasize in the methods chapter is you need a good question. You know, that's the basic, that's the mother of all research. You need a good research question, and you need to work on that. You need to go from a topic to an interesting and significant question. And then you can start to think, what kind of meaning is useful here? Do I need to understand something in its proper context? Do I want to sort of unearth those hidden linguistic practical complexes and then understand something? Or which often you do through a kind of historical research, which in the jargon is called genealogical research, but it's very, very important. Or do I engage in try to get those dialogues going and often be part of it to make sense of something? And that's what I describe in that chapter, and can say a lot more about it, but I think the time is too short to do that.
Viewers will just have to read the book, and I'm sure many people watching will have done, and also will be interested. So it was 2011 that it was first published. Let's have another look at the book, The Meaning in Action, Interpretation and Dialogue in Policy Analysis. So now, 2019, what do you see as the future for this book?
Well,
have things changed at all in your thinking?
I think there's been developments, and I think for me the most interesting development is the emergence of practice theory. So if I were to write a second edition, I would pay much more attention to practice theory, which I think is a kind of dialogical meaning, because we understand the world by engaging with it, and then there's back talk, and we have to make sense of the back talk. And it allowed me to bring in another important philosophical tradition, which is pragmatism. Right. But that I haven't given it much thought, but that would be a big difference. And I would, of course, throw a couple of other things out, but that I think are less relevant in hindsight.
Fantastic. Yeah, so watch this space then, but I think you'd certainly have a keen readership around here if a second edition were to come out. So thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, and it was a pleasure to talk about it.
Great to have you.
Okay, thanks, Wendy.
Thank you.